Hi, welcome to Chapter 4, Preparing for Learning. The ability to effectively manage students is critical to helping students achieve success. However, of equal importance is the ability of teachers to be able to develop quality lesson plans. In this chapter, Chapter 4, we will learn about the components of a lesson plan and best practices related to how quality lesson plans can be developed and implemented in the classroom. Slide 2 illustrates the 5 themes that we'll be covering in this chapter related to planning for learning. Slide 3 is a slide that's familiar to you. These are the questions that comprise your signature assignment. Notice that there's not a particular question that's related to planning for learning, but the content of this chapter would be very, very helpful, and you can relate it to the philosophy question, you can relate it to the management question, you could relate information on planning to the preferred instructional strategy section. So even though there's not a specific question on this slide related to planning or lesson planning, the content in this chapter may be very helpful to you and can supplement some of your responses to the questions that I've just reviewed with you. Slide 4, Planning for Learning. If you read pages 107 and 108, there's a short scenario, a vignette, and about Peggy Stone and Jim Hartley. Peggy is a beginning teacher, Jim Hartley is an experienced teacher. Read those pages to obtain a sense of how each would go about planning their lessons. And the question would be, what is the difference in planning between a beginning teacher and a veteran teacher? And what are the differences that you find when you're reading about their planning approaches? So take a few minutes to read those 2 pages and think about the differences in those approaches. On slide 5, we're going to be talking about our first topic, why do teachers plan? And if you go to slide 6, you'll see several pictures. And what I'd like you to do is, before you move on, is to look at those pictures and see in what way these pictures might illustrate the benefits to planning. In other words, you see Linus there with a blanket. In what way might that relate to the importance of planning, or why teachers might plan? You also see some scripts on the right-hand side there. Why would a picture of a script be shown here, and what is the relationship between a script and lesson planning? You also see a blueprint. You also see darts and a bullseye. You also see the thinking monkey. So look at those questions and think about the relationship between, look at those pictures and think about the relationship between those pictures and teacher planning. And go to slide 7 and you will find some of those ideas that connect the pictures with teacher planning. So for example, teacher planning helps you to clarify your learning objectives so that you know exactly what you're going to try to accomplish. And if you saw the bullseye there with the dart, I think that picture probably best related to that idea. It helps you to anticipate, the second check helps you to anticipate instructional needs in advance so that you can organize needed materials. And that could be several of those pictures, including one where they're gathering books. It could also be the thinking monkey slide, where they're reflecting on on what needs to be organized, what needs to be gathered. Might also be the blueprint slide. Provides a script that guides your interactions with students. That's the 3rd check mark. And again, you had a picture of a script there that related to this idea. And the 4th one was that it provides a form of emotional and psychological security, which will bolster confidence and reduce anxiety. And you had a picture there, Linus with his blanket, and I think that kind of correlated very nicely to that last idea. So all 4 of those ideas provide some reasons why planning is important and beneficial for teachers. If we go to slide 8, entitled Planning for Learning, and you will see the second topic that we'll cover, which is factors influencing planning. These factors can be found on pages 110 to 116 in your text. If we go to slide 9, and we can see the factors that influence instructional planning. Those are the elements in yellow around the outside that influence lesson planning. Ineffective teachers will often blame students for the lack of achievement. If you go into a teacher's lounge or sometimes in a group of, when you're talking with a group of teachers, in some cases teachers will blame lack of student achievement on the students. And affective planning, however, is one way in which teachers can assume responsibility or take responsibility for increasing student achievement. In what ways can teacher planning impact student achievement? What are your thoughts on that? How does teacher planning help students better achieve? If you go to slide 10, I've taken those factors that you saw on slide 9, the previous slide, and I've put them in a little chart. So you'll see the factors on the left-hand side of the chart, and then you'll see a description of the factor on the right-hand side. So take a moment to look at the factors and a description of those factors for slides 10 and for slides 11. And I will meet you at slide 12. Slide 12 takes us to our third topic, which is a planning model. And if we move to slide 13, in looking at a planning model, a lesson plan is divided up into 5 components. The learning outcomes is a broad category that deals with the domain being taught. And as you will learn in just a little bit, the domains can be cognitive, they can be affective, or they can be psychomotor domains. This learning outcome category also would be a place where you would list your Georgia Performance Standard that you're addressing in your lesson plan. And it also would be a time when you would, or a place in which you would list the focus or topic of your lesson, the objective, and possibly questions that you will use. So that's a broad category. Learning outcomes is a broad category. Several things could fall into that category. The second component of lesson planning is assessment, and this is how you will determine whether students learned anything from your lesson. An assessment can be a quiz, it can be an observation using a rubric, it can be a test, be a short or long written response, etc. Many ways in which you can assess student understanding of what you're being taught. Now if we go to slide 14, we have the third piece of a lesson plan is the learning experiences, what the lesson will involve. The learning experience, or third component, has to do with the actual instruction. What instructional strategies will be used, what materials are needed, how will you motivate students, what are the learning steps or the sequence, how will you end the lesson. And the fourth component deals with other considerations. These are especially related to those students who have special needs. In other words, how are you going to meet the needs of students that have special needs, such as learning disabilities. And the last component deals with your reflection of the lesson. What went well? What would you do differently if you could do the lesson over again? Okay, so those are very broad categories, 5 components that are related to lesson planning, and within each component there are several steps, as you will see in just a few minutes, related to the actual lesson plan. Now Ralph Tyler was the first educator to outline the steps of lesson planning, and the above slide depicts the 4 questions he proposed as the basis for lesson planning. For example, the first question was, what educational purposes, objectives, should the school or should the teacher seek to attain? How can learning experiences be selected which are likely to be useful in attaining these objectives? The third question that he posed is, how can learning experience be organized for effective instruction? So number 2 is, what learning experience should be selected, and then how do you organize them to actually implement them into the lesson? And then the last one is, how can learning be evaluated? Objectives are a very important part. We're on slide 16. Objectives are a very important part of lesson planning. They are generally found in the learning outcomes section of the lesson plan. Objectives help focus on what will be taught and what the acceptable level of mastery will be. In the above slide, you will see the following. You will see conditions. For example, given a list of sentences. You will see the observable performance, which will identify. You will see respective criteria, 90% of the prepositional phrases. And other examples can be found on page 118, other examples of objectives. Another approach by Gronlund can be found at the bottom of page 118. In this approach, a general objective is provided along with a general objective would be general objectives are provided along with a specific behavior. For example, when working with prepositional phrases, the general objective would be understands prepositional phrases, and the specific behavior could be identifies prepositional phrases in sentences. So there's 2 different ways that you can go about stating your objectives, and it probably would be helpful for you to go into the text on page 118 and read a little bit more about those 2 ways in which you would create an objective. Again, objective is probably going to go at the top of your lesson plan under the outcomes section. Slide 17, entitled Planning for Learning Components, a word about domains. Objectives can be written for the cognitive domain, the affective domain, and the psychomotor domain. The above slide defines each, and this information can be found on pages 119 and 122. So if you're developing a lesson based on knowledge and skills, you're going to be addressing the cognitive domain. If you're going to be developing a lesson that has to do with attitudes and values, might be a little bit harder to assess, you're going to be dealing with affective domain. And if you're developing a lesson that has to do with coordination and physical skills, that would be called the psychomotor domain. Now, this exercise can determine the extent to which you know the domains, and we are on slide 18. Place a CD, which stands for cognitive domain, if you think the objective is for the cognitive domain. Place an AD for affective domain if you think the statement up in the slide is an affective objective, and place a PMD, psychomotor domain, for a statement or objective that you feel is psychomotor oriented. And the answers will appear on the next slide, slide 19. On slide 19, you'll notice the answers to the previous slide, slide 18. Note that some objectives can contain a combination of domains. For example, a student will understand the role of overhand motion and eye movement in hitting a moving object, and will hit a target using an overhand motion. This combines the cognitive and psychomotor domains. All right. This will conclude the first portion of Chapter 4, Part 1, and I will stop now, and then we will pick back up on slide 20 for Chapter 4, Part 2.